there! It's Mike MacArthur from the Oshkosh Public Library, ready for some more Librarian Learns. This is the series where I take a look at some local Oshkosh history that I've wondered about myself, or people have asked me why I've been librarying at the library. If you are wondering why this looks a little different this month, it's because my normal recording setup got a little wonky and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. It's kind of beside the point because this week we're going to be hitting the streets with Lee Reichertzer and learning about some more Oshkosh beer history, specifically the Wildcat Breweries of Oshkosh. These were the breweries and bootleggers who kept the booze flowing in Oshkosh during Prohibition, and boy did it flow. So enough time talking to me in this weird room. Let's hit the streets with Lee. So here we are in Kentucky Street, 1920, Prohibition goes into effect. That's kind of where our story starts.
Yeah, and Prohibition was just an absolutely hated law in Oshkosh. No one was going to stop drinking just because some unpopular law all of a sudden came into being. The problem with that is that all the breweries in town had to shut down. So all of a sudden there's this vacuum and there's no beer being made. Now into that void steps these Wildcat breweries. These are run by bootleggers and they're totally illegal breweries. Weird ironies of Prohibition in Oshkosh is that before Prohibition, there were 3 breweries operating in town, the Rahr Brewing Company, Oshkosh Brewing Company, and Peoples Brewing Company. During Prohibition, there were no fewer than 12 Wildcat breweries going in Oshkosh. And there were definitely many more than that. We only know of those 12 because they were either identified by bootleggers later on or else these were breweries that actually got raided. These breweries went up everywhere, in warehouses, in outbuildings behind saloons, and sometimes in the basement of homes. And here on Kentucky Street, this home had a Wildcat brewery in its basement. You wouldn't think a brewery would fit into a home like this, but it definitely did. And the guy who lived here was named Neil Safford. And Neil Safford had no experience brewing beer. He'd probably never even set foot in a brewery. But he didn't need to, because what these people would do is they would connect with these bootleggers, and the bootleggers would take care of everything. They'd put all the equipment in, they'd take care of the brewing, the packaging, the whole thing. The deal was, though, that the owner would get paid by the bootleggers. And if the property got raided by federal agents and the owner of the property got arrested, the bootleggers would pay their fines, and if the guy ended up in jail, they would pay them for the time they spent in jail. Neil Safford was one of these unfortunate guys that actually got busted and ended up going to jail.
All right, and that's why we know that it was here, because he got busted.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have no idea that there was this brewery here. And so obviously it doesn't look like a brewery, but at the time of the arrest, they found 900 cases of bottled beer here ready to go out the door. So this is a real brewery.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah.
All right, so here we are in Harrison Street in front of the Ginger Snap Tavern behind me. This place actually is directly connected to the Wildcat Brewery on Kentucky.
Yeah, so that Safford Brewery on Kentucky, when it was busted, it was alleged that the beer that they were making, at least part of it, was coming up here to the roadhouse that was here. So we're in what is now, or what was then known as the Nordheim area. This was not part of Oshkosh. This was just outside the city limits. In 1920, a fairly notorious couple named Rudolph and Olive Folsch left Oshkosh. They had run a series of bars in Oshkosh, and when Prohibition started, they came out here, and for good reason. I mean, this was kind of no man's land, so you could do pretty much what you wanted out here. So they ran a speakeasy out here, and in addition to the speakeasy, they also had a brothel here. So, if you're going to do these kind of things, it's best not to be right in the city limits.
Right. So you're talking about them doing these kind of vaguely illegal, though common knowledge, except common knowledge that it was happening out in the middle of nowhere. But all the Wildcat breweries didn't necessarily seek discretion in their location.
No, they weren't discreet at all. And some of them were right out there, right in the open.
Right, which is where our next stop is taking us. All right, so when you were saying that some of them were pretty brazen about bootlegging in the middle of town, you weren't kidding. Tell us about where we are now.
No, we're at the southeast corner of Division and High, and we are literally in the middle of town. And there was a hotel with a speakeasy here, and in the basement they had a brewery. Very visible location, but for the most part that didn't matter all that much because the Oshkosh police had no interest in enforcing the prohibition laws. They were as opposed to it as everybody else. As one bootlegger said, they bought and drank as much beer, bootleg beer, as everybody else in Oshkosh did. So they had no interest in seeing these breweries get shut down. The brewery here was run by a man named William Crook, who, as I said, had a speakeasy here on this location as well. Crook got arrested a couple times during Prohibition. The second time he got raided in 1930, they shut down his Wildcat brewery. And because he had a couple of arrests, he ended up doing jail time for it. So he did 6 months in the House of Corrections in Milwaukee. And Crook was a little older. He was 66 at that point, and essentially that jail sentence ended up being a death sentence for him. He did come back to Oshkosh, but almost immediately died upon returning. Just to show you how cozy this relationship was between some of these Wildcat brewers and the Oshkosh police, at Crook's funeral, one of his pallbearers was Art Gabbert. Art Gabbert was the Oshkosh chief of police at the time. So he's well aware of what was going on here.
So when you talk about them being raided, they're only being raided by the federal authorities when they came to town.
It's always federal authorities. The Oshkosh police, on rare occasions there were raids by Oshkosh police, but it was almost always because the people were doing something so flagrant that they had to do something.
Gotcha.
But in every other case, it's always federal agents, and they would come up here and just periodically make these sweeps. When they would do that, a lot of times, one place would get raided and word would go out immediately to the other places that the feds are in town, shut it down. They'd shut the places down, lock them up, and things would go on as normal after that.
Interesting. Cool. So for this next section, I somehow deleted all the footage that we took while talking about this building on South Main. I have all the audio, which you will hear, but you won't actually see us talking. Knocking it out of the park on this episode here. Lots of snafus. Back to the histories. So here we are at the corner of South Main and 6th Street. Tell us why we're here.
Because there was a Wildcat brewery right behind us in the basement of that building. It was run by a guy named Ted Fisher. Before Prohibition, Fisher had been hooked up with the Oshkosh Brewing Company. He sold Oshkosh Brewing Company beer out of here. And he would sell Oshkosh Brewing Company beer for about 10 cents a bottle. Mm-hmm. Now, when Prohibition comes along, all of a sudden the price of beer more than doubles. So for a saloon keeper, if you could make your own beer, you could make quite a bit of money doing this. So he hires a brewer, and they install a brewery in the basement of that building. Fisher's beer, those bottles of beer that he's producing, of Wildcat beer, are selling for $0.25. So, like I said, more than double that Oshkosh Brewing Company beer was selling for. No, what they would usually do, almost all these places, they would buy what is known as wort from former breweries that had been shut down. So it was legal for these breweries, for the old breweries, to make wort, which is nothing but unfermented beer.
Right.
So the guys like this, they would buy, these huge casks full of wort, and then they'd ferment it into beer down in their basement. So the first part of the brewing process was really taken care of for them.
Right.
The Oshkosh Brewing Company made wort. The closed Waupun Brewing Company made wort. In New London, there was the Knapstein Brewery made wort. These were all places that supplied bootleggers with wort for making beer.
Interesting. Cool.
This was also the first place in Oshkosh to be raided by federal agents. This was raided in 1927. And it seems as though they may have been trying to make a statement when they raided this place. They absolutely destroyed all the equipment down there. They broke everything up. The entire basement was flooded with beer. They got so wild that they even broke the gas lines in there, and the Oshkosh Fire Department had to be called in. So Fisher gets arrested. He doesn't go to jail. He ends up just paying a fine. But there was no stigma attached to this kind of thing. In 1933, Prohibition ends, and Fisher runs for the Oshkosh City Council, and he gets elected to the Oshkosh City Council.
It probably helped with his campaign, really.
Oh, he's much more known by then.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so we're at the corner of 14th and Oregon, and so the way bootleg beer worked in this city is there were about 7, possibly 8 groups that actually were producing all this bootleg beer. 2 of them were quite large. One of them, they were both based on the south side. Both of the large ones were based on the south side. One was run by a man named Elmer Steinhilber. The other was run by a man named Frank Butch Youngworth. Okay. The place here was set up by Butch Youngworth. There was a brewery here set up by the Butch Youngworth group. Now, this was a speakeasy run by a woman named Mary Colrose. Mary Colrose's brother was Eddie Colrose, and Eddie Colrose was part of Butch Youngworth's gang. Gotcha. So they set up the brewery here, and this was one of the largest, if not the largest, Wildcat brewery in this part of Wisconsin. This was a full-on production brewery. When this place was busted in 1930, they found 5,000 gallons of beer on hand. Wow. That's 160 barrels of beer. Wow. There is not a brewery in Winnebago County today that has that much beer on hand. Right. So this is a true large-scale brewery. Right. After Prohibition ended, Mary Colrose just kept right on going. She converted this speakeasy back into a saloon, and she remained as the bartender here until 1957.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Cool.
And Mary Colrose grew up just around the corner from this place. She was kind of a hard luck story. I mean, her at the age of 8, or in the 8th grade, she quit school. Her parents were both disabled. She worked to help support the family. And when her mother passed away, that's when she actually bought this place and went into the speakeasy business. She had never worked in a saloon before in her life. So she just dove headfirst into it.
So hey, I learned something. Thanks again for Lee for bringing all the beer-related facts. If you want to know more about brewing history and the history of Oshkosh beer, check out his blog, the Oshkosh Beer Blog, which you can find at oshkoshbeer.blogspot.com. You can also check out his 2 books, The Breweries of Oshkosh, Their Rise and Fall, and Winnebago County Beer, A Heady History. Both can be found at the library. Special thanks to William Matthew Jr. and Kelly Jolin and Ron Spalding for hanging out and talking beer history and brewing history that occurred in their own home. I love being able to share history like this with people who actually live in these buildings. As always, if you have comments, questions, or topics that you would like to see me cover, feel free to contact me at the library using the links in the description, or just throw out a question or comment in the comment sections below. And with that, I'll see you later.